Welcome to You and Your Pets. I'm Jim Horton. We're here with our resident expert, Dr. Ernest Rogers of the Maplewood Animal Hospital, and we discuss a broad range of issues related to your pets. For this particular show, we'd like to concentrate on the summer and warm weather issues that affect cats and dogs. And what are some of the warm weather issues?
Well, I think we can look at them as all being grouped around being outside. We as humans spend more time outside. We often allow our cats to go out in the summer, and we certainly take our dogs outside. So most of the warm weather issues surround being outside and having the animals outside with us.
And what about pets in cars during the summer?
Well, that's the big gorilla in the room, of course. Both the SPCA, NJSPCA, the ASPCA, and many of the local shelters all warn about heat in the car. So I found that even when I'm in my car and I have the air conditioning going, I have to put it up full blast because it gets hot. Imagine if the windows are up and your dog is in there, even if it's 65 to 70 outside the car. In the sunshine, the inside of the car acts like a glass house. And so you end up at being, even 65, 70 outside, it could get up into the hundreds inside the car. A dog can only compensate for heat by breathing faster. A dog doesn't actually have any sweat glands on its body, only on the pads of its feet. So when a dog is in very hot temperatures, even if it does have water, it still can't control its temperature, and you find that the temperature starts to rise. In a dog or a cat, when the temperature gets up over 102, 103, 104, you start to have decompensation. And in many of the cases where animals have been brought into me, we find that they come in, they're decompensated, they can barely breathe, they're dehydrated, and sometimes, no matter what we do, they die. And that's because the blood starts to coagulate and they start having problems. That's at very high temperatures, but that's the end result. So typically, when we have a dog outside, even if it's cool outside, but it's been exercising and you put it in the car, minimal amount of heat after an exercised dog will cause its body temperature to rise. So we have to be very careful about dogs and cars. And if I can just make one more point, in the summer we have lots of festivals. One that I'm very familiar with is the Balloon Festival. People have to check before they go to the festivals and the carnivals and the other events, the wine tasting events. Check with the event operators to make sure you can bring your dog into these events, or be prepared to sit in the car with the dog, because it's just not fair to kill a dog or a cat by having it too hot.
Are some breeds of dog and cats more susceptible to the heat than others?
Great question. Yes, we see that dogs with pushed-in faces, I like to say they've been chasing parked cars, but dogs with pushed-in faces, the boxers, the French bulldog, the English bulldog, the Boston, the dogs with the pushed-in faces tend not to be able to move air as efficiently as dogs with longer snouts. And so we find that, yes, they're more susceptible to the heat, they get hotter faster, and their breathing is rapidly deteriorating. So they end up getting hotter.
And for cats?
Cats are sort of the same thing. We do have cats with faces that are a little bit bracky, what we call in medicine brachycephalic or short-nosed, though they tend to have breathing problems. Often they can't move air efficiently, but also the long-haired dogs. A lot of people seem to think that if your dog has long hair, it should be protected from the sun and therefore cooler. Not necessarily the case. Many dogs with long hair get hot as well. The opposite is also true, but more not because of the heat, because of the sun. White dogs with very short hair can get sunburn. So we have to be aware of that as well in the summer. That's a new problem that we see in the summer.
Okay, and you mentioned that dogs, it's through the pads on their feet?
They only sweat through the pads on their feet, not through any other method.
So when we have hot asphalt or hot concrete outside the car, what does that do?
Well, again, another excellent point. If you're going to some of these festivals, in fact, just a week ago or 2 weeks ago, there was Mayfest in Maplewood. And I was there with many, many other people, many of whom brought their dogs. And that tarmac, that floor, or the pavement is very, very hot. If you can take your socks off and your shoes off, and you can put your bare foot on that tarmac or on the pavement, and you're comfortable, your dog will be comfortable. In most cases, especially during this last Mayfest at Maplewood, it was very hot. And it's better that if you're going to take your dog, make sure they're on grass than on the hot concrete or hot pavement. They won't necessarily burn their feet, but it makes it very uncomfortable for them.
What other outside activities have unintended consequences?
Well, of course, in the summer, we like to take our dogs up into the bush and into the reservation, to upstate New York, to Vermont, to many places where there are forests. And of course, we know about the tick and flea issues. So making sure that your dogs are well protected against ticks and fleas is a very big problem for many people. They fail to start early enough, or use sufficient enough, or replace it in time. And those are the three big issues with fleas and ticks. I have my favorite insecticides, because that's what they are. But basically, whatever one you use, you have to make sure you follow the package directions, inspect your dog regularly for fleas and ticks, even though you have that on. Ensure that whatever product you use is not irritating your dog or cat's skin. So you want to make sure that you go and look where you've applied it, whether it's a collar or a drip that drops down the back. Make sure you've checked it, that the dog is not having a reaction to that, usually within 24 to 48 hours. With collars, it might take a little longer to have a reaction. So certainly those are the issues that we have to worry about with dogs when we're taking them into the bush. Other issues are, of course, we have hornets and bees, and often dogs, my dog is guilty of this, they'll see something fly in, they'll go to bite it. Well, if it's a bee or a hornet, a bee injects venom, a hornet will bite. So a bite will be painful and the dog's tongue may swell, but if a bee injects venom into the dog's tongue, we can have a dyspnea or a breathing problem as a result of this. These clearly don't happen in the summer. Clearly don't happen in the winter, it happens in the summer. So keeping an eye on your dog, making sure they aren't chasing things that are flying that could be venomous or injure their mouth is a very big part of summer activities that we have to watch out for.
How about altitude? You're talking about taking your animals out to the bush or to the mountains. Is altitude a problem?
Just as it is for us, minimum altitudes isn't going to affect us much. But if we start hiking, dogs don't rock climb too well, I don't think. But if we go hiking, if we go biking, and we're doing it at altitude, our exercise is somewhat reduced. We can't keep up as easily. Now, we aren't talking the Alps, we're talking maybe the Adirondacks, but still going uphill, coming downhill can put a real strain on the dog's joints. It can also put a strain on the dog's lungs and respiratory capacity. So you don't want to take a 14-year-old dog running and jogging for the first time, especially if he's not used to it. We can have cardiac events in dogs, and cats don't usually run too well, but cardiac events in dogs from running and getting hot again, and being in the bush, doing these activities that we enjoy as humans. Another real big thing, and it might not be as big here as it was when I was in Alabama, are snakes and other venomous reptiles or venomous insects. I see an awful lot of people that come in with a big welt on their dog, and it turns out that this dog was, again, bees, hornets, wasps, or some other venomous. The big one that's around here that we worry about is the brown recluse spider. We do have snakes. There is something called the Picatinny rattler, and out by me in Somerville, there's actually been cited some cottonmouths and copperheads. And so we know that there are venomous snakes around, and we have to be careful with them.
What exactly will happen to an animal that's bitten by a venomous snake? Is that a mortal incident, or is that something where they can overcome it?
Well, in my experience, and again, this was only in Alabama, in my experience, what happens is the animal sees a snake, puts its nose towards the snake to get a sniff, and the snake bites it on the nose.
Right.
Often we get necrosis, necrotic, or dead and dying tissue around the nose, and in that case, we have a real hard problem to save the nose, and we end up doing grafts in the end. So that can be a real serious problem. Many snapping turtles, for instance, snakes, even non-venomous.
Porcupines?
Say again?
Porcupines?
Well, they aren't venomous.
Well, that's true.
But if you're in the bush and you come up with a porcupine, you're going to get a mouthful of quills. And I've had those issues also happen. But with venomous animals, we can have a reaction. And a lot of venomous animals, particularly of the reptile form, will carry Pseudomonas or Salmonella, and that can cause an infection. Mm-hmm. So that's another issue that occurs when we're out in the bush or around ponds.
Okay, well, you mentioned the snapping turtle. That's why I brought up the issue of the porcupine. Snapping turtle is not venomous.
No, it isn't. But if it can break the skin, in its mouth there would be bacteria that can cause an infection. So that's another problem. I mean, we might not get venomous, we might not be envenomated, but we might well get an infection that is very difficult to control or very difficult to approach and resolve.
So if an animal gets a nose full of quills because it doesn't know a porcupine from a bunny rabbit, do you recommend that the owner take them out, or to bring the animal in and have the veterinarian do it?
It really depends on the severity, but I would suggest every animal that has had quills in or around its face, at the very least, see a veterinarian so he can evaluate it. Often what happens is quills can break off and then they can migrate. So a quill here in the face might migrate into the sinuses, and 3 months later we have a severe infection with a foreign body. So being able to evaluate these animals is very important. Of course, out in the summer, we also have to worry not only about porcupines, groundhogs, skunks, fox,
Coyotes?
Coyotes. They can all carry rabies, and they can all fight. So we know that there's been a problem with coyotes in around northern New Jersey and in New York City. And we know that, again, they come out at dusk and dawn. So if you have a pet, don't let your cat out early in the evening or early in the morning, because they're more likely to encounter and have a negative interaction with a wild animal.
What about bears? We've had bears in Maplewood not that long ago. They've been here, but out in the woods and camping, there's a lot more of them. Do they normally just shy away if a dog comes padding down the line, or do they stand and fight?
Well, I guess it would depend on the bear, what he decides he wants to do or she decides she wants to do. Clearly, female bears with cubs are going to stand and fight. But the average dog will look at a bear and say, oops, I think I made a mistake. But if they don't know that, they get swatted by a bear and they could be laid open and killed. But bears normally are berry eaters, and so they aren't going to go after a dog or a cat for a kill.
Okay. Well, we're just about out of time for this segment. Is there anything else along this line that you wanted to add briefly?
Well, I think we talked about snapping turtles, and one of the big things about snapping turtles, they're in ponds. So if you have a dog, always bathe him after he's been in a pond, in your pool, or in salt water. We don't want that, whatever's in the water, to contact him. A big problem I've seen is dogs that drink out of swimming pools. Swimming pools contain chlorine or bromine, and often that affects their digestive tract.
Okay. Well, we'll have to take a break, but right after the break, we'll continue with this. This is You and Your Pets. I'm Jim Horton, and we're here with Dr. Ernest Rogers, our expert from Maplewood Animal Hospital.
Television is a powerful and influential medium that allows different groups the opportunity to produce programming that directly affects their own communities. Public, educational, and government access channels ensure that all people, regardless of race, age, gender, disability, religion, or economic status, have access to local government information and the use of a public communication forum. Make sure everyone has a voice. Support your local PEG channels.
Welcome back to You and Your Pets. I'm Jim Horton, and we're here with our resident expert, Dr. Ernest Rogers of the Maplewood Animal Hospital, and we've been discussing summer and your pets. And I'd like to turn briefly to, you mentioned swimming in a lake before. Would you ever recommend that, whether it's swimming in a pool or swimming in a lake, that you have your animals swim with you?
Well, I think that'd be safer than having it swim alone, but there are the recommendations now. A lot of organizations are recommending now that if you have a dog either on a boat or swimming, that you put a life jacket on it. When I grew up, basically dogs would go swimming, and I don't know of any dogs that drowned. But there is one big issue where a dog can drown, and that is in a pool. We all realize that pools have stairs and that the dog can get out on the stairs. Until the dog is trained to find the stairs and walk out, he will swim and swim and swim. And there have been numerous cases of dogs being found at the bottom of the pool because it just ran out of energy and couldn't swim anymore and drowned. Having said that, I don't have a problem with dogs swimming. Would I like my dog to swim with me? Of course. But I think we have to recognize safety, both for our dog and for ourselves. So if you go into a pond that is relatively stagnant water, beyond all the other things that are floating in there, algae and dead animals that could be in there can all pose an issue for your dog if they drink the water. So one big thing, yes, let your dog swim. Be careful of the surroundings. Be sure that you know that this is a safe waterway to be in. And then make sure that you have plenty of drinking water for your dog before he goes into the water, so that your dog isn't likely to drink the water.
Okay, what about internal and external parasites related to swimming? What are some of the issues to be concerned about?
Well, in terms of, not so much of swimming, just being in the bush, often you have animals that'll find a puddle and they'll take a drink of the puddle, and there's nothing you can do about it. They're 100 yards away taking a drink out of a puddle. What we used to call in Canada beaver fever is also called giardia. And it's a parasite, an internal parasite that causes pretty severe diarrhea. The dog will lose weight, and that's something you can pick up by chewing on grass where an animal that had giardia, often skunks, raccoons, foxes, carnivores will poop, and they can have giardia, and they seem to do okay with it, but your dog will pick it up, and now your dog will be getting intermittent diarrhea. In terms of other issues with the water, as I said, there's all kinds of things that can pick up from the water, from stagnant ponds, but the parasites that you might find in stagnant water will include, of course, giardia. They can pick up coccidia, and there might be some other flagellates that they can pick up in the water. It's not common, so I don't think they're likely to pick up too many internal parasites from the water. In terms of being around and walking through other animals' poop, obviously in an unmaintained park or in an unmaintained lot, they can certainly pick up other dogs or other wild animals' poop. That's on their feet. When they lick their feet, they start what we call the oral fecal route. Mm-hmm. They can pick up roundworms, hookworms, whipworms, and that's why we test them every year. So that's something else we have to be concerned about, internal parasites. Of course, the big one is heartworm. And though heartworm affects cats, we don't always check our cats for heartworm. Maybe we should. And if you remember, our cardiologist friend, Dr. Goodwin, suggested that that would be a reasonable thing to do, mm-hmm. though I've never been requested to test a parasite for cats for heartworm. But cats and dogs are all susceptible to heartworm, so that's another parasite they can pick up. External parasites, of course, are the fleas and the ticks, are the big ones. There are other types of parasites, external parasites that they can pick up, but those are the two big ones. So make sure you protect your dog, have plenty of drinking water, avoid having them walk places that are unpatrolled or unclean, and then make sure also that you wipe their feet when they get home. That's always a big one.
You mentioned fleas and ticks, and I know in the previous part of the segment you also mentioned collar and drop-on down the back of the animal. Is one better than the other, or are they both just as effective?
Well, I mean, I have my preferences, but in all honesty, there are three basic kinds. There's the the chew that you can give your animal. There's the flea collar, and that comes in many different brands, as does the drops on the back. I have my preferences within the realm of companies and whatnot, and people who are interested can certainly contact me, and I'll tell them what I think. I don't think it's appropriate to judge one over the other on the air, but certainly they can all be effective in some animals. You have to look at what your animal's going to be doing. If your animal's going to be around the house, going in the backyard, just about all of them will be effective. Mm-hmm. If you're going to be taking your animals out into the bush where they're exposed to ticks, or long grass or bushes where they're exposed to ticks, then you're probably going to want to get one of the ones that are specifically made for ticks. Having said that, there are none that I recognize at this point that are made for ticks that you can apply to cats. The one big thing I want everyone to understand is you cannot put dog, flea, and tick medicine on a cat. You will kill it.
Oh, for heaven's sakes.
So make sure you get flea and tick for your cat, for the right size of your cat, and flea and tick for your dog for the correct size of your dog.
Okay, that's a very important piece of information which I was not aware of. Let's turn now to summer events such as 4th of July or summer storms,
Right.
such as thunderstorms, loud noises.
Right.
How does that affect dogs and cats?
Well, we know that in some dogs and cats, there's absolutely no problem. They hear the thunder, they go to sleep. In some dogs, and I've done studies on this when I was at the University of Tennessee, we looked at a dog that had something called thunder phobia. And it wasn't the thunder itself, it was the precipitation or the incoming thunderstorm. And so what would happen, the dog could sense, or we thought the dog could sense, the increasing humidity, decreasing barometric pressure. That relates to a storm. And the dog was getting anxious before the first crack of thunder. So we know that dogs can recognize storms, recognize thunder. Similarly, they can recognize fireworks. All these things in dogs and cats can precipitate an anxiety attack or anxious behavior. So when we know, for instance, the 4th of July, or if you live next door to a place where they do a lot of fireworks, like a stadium, you want to make sure that your dogs and cats are well secured in their house. I always recommend a microchip. The microchip itself will just identify the dog, but you can get what's called a GPS tracker. That's separate from a microchip. I know you can get them through Verizon, and I've seen them on the internet, where you can put them on their collar, and on your smartphone you can actually follow in real time where they are. So you want to make sure that if your dog is ever outside, that you have one of those. Because when dogs become anxious, they run. When cats become anxious, they run. And they don't necessarily pay attention to where they're going. So it's not hard for them during a lightning, thunderstorm, or during fireworks, or any loud noises, for them to get anxious, run, and hide, and it's difficult for them to find their way home.
Would you ever recommend that an owner take a dog or a cat to a fireworks show or display?
Well, I mean, if your dog is not troubled by that, that's fine. I don't see a problem. If your dog is troubled by that, then beyond securing them and identifying them, the one thing, there's a couple of products on the market. I think one is called a Thunder Shirt. And basically what it does is it wraps around the dog, and you can get them in different sizes, to basically swaddle the dog. As we used to do with young babies, you swaddle the young baby so that they feel secure. There are a number of different brands. I think the one brand that I'm most familiar with is Thunder Shirt, but I know there are a number of other ones there, and you can check at your local pet store to see if they have them. And that sometimes relieves the anxiety. And so even if your dog is afraid of thunder, lightning, and fireworks, giving them that security, staying with them is always good. If your dog's not afraid of fireworks, I don't think he'd enjoy them, but he wouldn't enjoy the colors and what's happening. But certainly if your dog isn't afraid of it, I see no reason why you can't have them as long as the event allows dogs.
And speaking of that, we have barbecues at that time of the year. What are some of the safety concerns with barbecuing?
Well, the biggest thing about barbecuing, depending on how big your barbecue is that dogs run and dogs don't always pay attention to where they're going. We have in the summer more burns, especially from the barbecues which use charcoal or briquettes. Mm-hmm. And those can be knocked over by a dog. The dog can get burned on them. But even the propane burners, if it's left open with meat on it and the dog jumps up, puts his paws on it, he can get burned on his paws. Certainly that's one big issue. The other big issue is that people having barbecues tend to eat their chicken bones and put them down on a plate, and the dog comes by and says, "Oh, chicken bones." Well, bones of any kind, I discourage my clients from allowing their animals to have it, because we can cause stomach perforations, intestinal perforations, and blockages. So what I recommend is make sure that if you're having a barbecue, either secure your dog away from where the people are eating, or make sure that people clean up and don't feed the dog some of the barbecues. Of course, we have barbecue, we have onions, we have garlic, which are no good for dogs, barbecue sauce, which can be very spicy, and jalapeno peppers, and all the rest can cause dietary upset in a dog. So barbecuing itself is great, but not if the dog is involved in some way negatively with that.
And what about allergies?
Allergies tend to surface more. I see them more in the spring and in the summer. This year's been particularly bad for trees, and the people in the know, the weathermen, the meteorologists are saying that it hasn't gotten as bad as it's going to, because we're going to soon have grass pollen as well as mold pollen and spores and tree pollen.
Something to look forward to.
Something to look forward to. And some dogs, even if they're not allergic to these things, just the fact that a foreign protein gets in their eye can cause them to have eye problems. They can be sneezing. So in bad pollen years, we can have problems with allergies in dogs.
And what do you do to protect your animal?
Well, I think there are a lot of things you can do. First, I would see your veterinarian to make sure that, in fact, it is an allergy and not an eye infection or an infection of the nose or something else. Then I think the best things you can do without seeing your veterinarian is every time your dog goes outside, wipe your dog down. Wipe the paws, wipe the body, wipe the face. If your dog has, for instance, gone into some type of body of water, taking him home and hosing him down with water is always the right thing to do. So if your dog's been out running through the bush, taking him down, hosing him down with water, you can use a light baby shampoo, or even if you don't use any shampoo, just hosing him down, or wiping him down with a damp cloth is going to get a lot of this pollen and this irritations off him.
I know our particular dog has a tendency to want to rub his head and his body on the lawn, and he does that fairly regularly, and we can't stop him from doing it. Is that something in a summer and with allergies is a basic problem? Should we pick him up when he does that, or just let him go ahead and do it?
I think let him go ahead and do it. My dog does the same thing. Many dogs do the same thing. If there are no consequences, no negative consequences, then I just let them do it. Clearly, we have to think of the adage, everything in moderation, including moderation.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we can protect our dogs so far, and then they just don't have a life anymore. So
let him be.
Let them be, assess what happens, and if it's a negative, then you got to address that issue.
All right, we're running very short on time, but is there anything that we left out we should have discussed at this point?
Nothing really that I can think of. I think the summer issues are all about monitoring your dog, monitoring the heat, monitoring what he gets into. I think those are the three big issues. And certainly, if anyone has any questions for me, they can always contact me at maplewoodAH, my email address, maplewoodAH@comcast.net. And I think from there, I can't do a diagnosis, I can't do a prognosis, but certainly I can address the issues and give them information.
Well, we've run out of time. Thank you for watching. This is You and Your Pets. I'm Jim Horton.